So it's just that consciousness, that awareness that the struggle for justice, at least in real time, you're not going to be seeing the kind of allyship that you would like to see. You're not going to see the kind of support that you would like to have. But that doesn't mean you stop, because that's the only way that progress has ever happened.
Welcome to the Higher Love with Megan podcast with me, your host, Megan Cooper, a trauma-informed therapist, life coach and disruptor of wellness norms based in Brighton, UK. This isn't another nice-to-have wellness podcast. Instead, this podcast seeks to redefine what it means to be well in today's world. Here, we challenge the status quo, seek to reunite wellness with social justice and improve accessibility, diversity and inclusivity within wellness and beyond. As a listener, you are not here to passively consume. Instead, you are an ambassador for real, embodied, societal and systemic change in the world. As your host, I stand for radical self-inquiry and being able to have those confronting but necessary conversations so that we can remember our collective humanity at this time. We're here for the revolution and you've got a front row seat. Fernando, thank you so much for being here this morning. This afternoon for me, this morning for you. I know it's early in the morning for you, so thank you so much for being here and your time today.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. Happy to talk.
Great. Well, as I was saying to you before we hit record, sometimes I know people who I invite on. Sometimes I know that there's this particular theme that I know that I really want to explore with this person. And sometimes, Instagram, the algorithm just serves me up a video and immediately I listen to it and I'm like, I know that I just need to connect with this person. Love what they're saying. And as I was just saying before we press record, there was that video that you shared where I was like, yes, I just need to reach out to this person immediately. I immediately sent you a DM. And I mean, for everything that I complain about social media for, the fact that we can literally DM somebody the other side of the planet within a hot second and then be in connection with them is amazing. So yeah, there are some things that I would love to explore with you today, but yeah, just a little bit of free flow as well. But I thought that it would just be a really good place to start because I don't know that much about you as well, apart from the stalking that I have done on your Instagram page. I thought that it would just be a really good way to start, firstly, for my context, but also for my listeners, for you to introduce yourself in whatever way, shape or form feels alive for you today.
Gotcha. Yeah, thank you. I think what you were mentioning just about the way that you found my content, what I love about social media has been that we're able to make these connections with people. Leslie on her page, me on my page, we just say what is true to us, what's in our hearts, and we put it out there. And sometimes the algorithm will show it to 500 people. Sometimes it shows it to 1 million. But we're able to find those people that are resonating with that same, value system that we're trying to promote. And so that I'm glad that you were able to find my page. I'm glad to find people like you and others who are trying to move towards the collective liberation of our people, right? Yeah. So a bit about my background. I'll try to be brief, but I think that something I've learned in the work that Leslie and I do, talking to families, is the importance of really understanding people's not just personal histories, but familial histories. So I'll be real brief. Yeah. My family comes from Mexico. So my family immigrated from Mexico. My mom was 7 years old when she came here. She had 10 siblings, grew up here with immigrant experience. I had the fortune of interviewing her, and she gave me a 2-hour synopsis of what her life was like. But she had me and my brothers when she was in her early 20s and raised us as a single mother. My dad was deported around the time I was 3 years old. And it didn't work out between my mom and him. So she ended up separating, raised us here. And I didn't really have a very culturally, I didn't have a strong cultural identity growing up, per se, not explicitly or consciously anyway. I did have the experience of growing up eating all the foods and seeing everything in the parties, but I never really had that close connection to my ancestry. Around college is when I started tapping into these kinds of things. That's when I learned about sociology, psychology, the histories that we weren't really taught very in depth in elementary school, middle school, high school. And so I started tapping into some of those things. I became an educator. So I got a teaching credential and taught middle school for about 5 years. And in that time is where I was really exploring these themes that I talk about on social media, where I'm trying to talk about complex issues, things that are very nuanced, have multiple perspectives, and I'm trying to condense it so that a 10, 11, 12-year-old student can understand it. And so we're talking about ancient civilizations, systems of oppression, racism, sexism, class, and all these different things that you might not know about unless someone's able to spell it out for you, right? You see it and you're experiencing it, but you might not have the vocabulary for it. And so that was really my kind of crash course in learning how to explain these concepts, right? Around the time that I'm teaching, I'm also doing organizing work in my community here in Santa Ana, California. It's a predominantly Latino community. About 78% of the population here is Latino. And I think I saw somewhere that 40% of those residents come from other countries, so they weren't native born. And there's a lot of efforts that are being done here. If you just look up Santa Ana politics, you're going to see lots of actions related to, there was recently, for example, a campaign to try to grant non-citizens the right to vote in local elections. We also have the lowest rent control percent that landlords can raise their rent in the state of California. Like, those are the kind of policies that we're fighting for in the city. And I was pretty active on the ground trying to educate people about these different things. And I was using my camera to take pictures, document actions that were happening. And that's really when I kind of stepped into the social media realm. So that's where I was educating people about these different concepts. 2020 hits, and Black Lives Matter's taken to the streets. We have COVID responses happening left and right, food distributions, and all kinds of things. And again, I take my camera out there, I'm documenting all these things. And that's when I started to build this audience. And around that time, I was shifting from just photographing and video to doing what I do now, which is talking to people and having long form conversations.
I love what you were speaking to just at the beginning about your background of having to explain things to 11, 12-year-olds. It reminds me of something that someone said to me once: if you only really fully understand a topic if you can explain it to a child. And it really stuck out to me there that that's such a gift within our, as what you're speaking to, issues that can be on the surface quite complex, but when we distill it down and we're able to be able to communicate it in simplistic ways, then yeah, it's a real gift, I think, at these times. So yeah, it was something that really caught my attention within that. But I would love for you to continue your story, because it's far more interesting than anything that I have to say right now.
And just to kind of add to that point of, being able to explain things in a simple way, I feel like that's really the strength that Leslie and I have been working to develop. We're trying to talk to lots of different people from lots of different backgrounds. We're trying to talk to people who have been in academia. We're trying to talk to people who maybe never graduated high school. And we're trying to reach both of those groups. So yeah, I will talk more about that later. So in 2020, on top of going out and documenting all these protests and supporting with, COVID efforts, there's political campaigns happening. And again, I'm knocking on doors, I'm talking to residents. And funnily enough, I believe I ended up knocking on one of Leslie's door when I was knocking. I didn't realize it at the time. We found out later.
Wow.
But so 2020 to 2022, around that time was when I'm really starting to build a local audience. And I'm talking about things like rent control. I'm talking about police accountability. We're talking about all kinds of different issues in the city. Leslie sees my content and is very enthusiastic. For your listeners who don't know Leslie, she has a page called Latinx Parenting, where right now she currently has around 200,000 followers. And you can look that up to see the kind of things that she talks about. But it was very much in line with the kind of values that I had personally. And so she and I, we start talking, and slowly we start to merge our work. So I'm over here talking about history and politics and organizing efforts. And Leslie's talking about the importance of culturally responsive parenting practices, parenting education, dismantling systems of oppression so that our families can have that full connection and just space to be in relationship with each other that we deserve. And so we start to just learn from each other. So I'm learning about her, the heart space is what we call it. And she's learning from me about the organizing and the political aspects of the advocacy work that she's promoting through her work. And I think over time I started to shift my focus from the local to just the general context that we see happening in our country, happening in our communities abroad. And that's really what you see on the page now. Is sometimes I'll be talking about things that are happening in Santa Ana and how that relates to a broader conversation, say around like masculinity For example, one of the videos I made was about an incident where teenagers were stabbing each other on the street.
Yeah.
Now that's definitely a local issue, but there's a broader sociological context at play as to what drives teenagers to be stabbing each other on the street. And it's not just here in our city. It happens, all over the country, in other parts of the world. So we're trying to bring those kind of conversations to the forefront. With Palestine, I think that's, largely been a shift that we had in 2023 after October 7th. We realized that there was information that she had known because she'd been invested in this work since, I want to say, 2007. She'd been learning about Palestine. And for me, I'd say around 2020, 2021, working with Palestinian organizers here on the ground for Black Lives Matter, I started to learn about the history and the struggle of the Palestinian people. And so when October 7th happened, we felt that we were able to fill a gap, especially in the Latino community, an information gap about what's happening and what does this mean for us and what role do we have to play in this situation. We can talk more about that, but I think that brings us up to speed on how I landed where I am today.
Before we go on, I'd so appreciate you to hit follow or subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify, click those 3 little dots next to settings to rate the show. On Apple Podcasts, you can leave a review or take a moment to explore how you can rate or review on the platform that you're listening or watching. This makes a difference. I truly believe we need to have more of these conversations to shake up the status quo. We'll beat the algorithm together with your clicks and shares. Now back to the episode.
I would love to speak about, there were some questions that I had for you around your, I don't like using this word, but you're kind of like your mission, your intentionality, I guess, within your work. And you, in the video that I connected with you on, you quoted James Baldwin, and I'd love to just read the quote for listeners and for people who haven't seen the video. The quote is, "Love has never been a popular movement, and no one's ever wanted really to be free. The world is held together, really it is held together by the love and the passion of a very few people." I would love to ask you what it is that you hear within that quote that informs your view of the moment, the global moment that we find ourselves in right now.
Yeah, I encourage anyone listening who hasn't taken the time to listen to James Baldwin or read James Baldwin. He's a very influential figure for me in terms of trying to communicate these ideas and really just the conviction of fighting for what's right. Yeah, powerful voice. When I read that quote, and why I chose to insert that quote is because I think the experience that I've had in doing the kind of work that I do has been the recognition that it's not a lot of us out here. We have 7 billion, 8 billion people on the planet. Here in our city, we have around 300,000 people. And I can name maybe 20 people that I know who regularly get involved in the political process here, trying to fight for our communities. When it comes to situations like Palestine, again, I think Leslie recognized in her space, which is the parent education space, and I guess you could say the nonviolent communication arena. She saw that there were all these people who advocated for social justice for children, calling for our families to have their needs met. And meanwhile, she's screaming on an island about what's happening in Gaza, and no one's coming to help. We had a lot of interactions with people saying, why won't you speak out? Why can't you speak out? And people have too much to lose, it feels. So when I hear that quote, it's just a recognition that there are a lot of people that may see what's happening in the world. They may recognize a responsibility to do something about what's happening in the world, but for whatever reason, they are unable to rise up to that responsibility. And there are others who may not see that they have a responsibility to do something about it. In Santa Ana, we were the only city in Orange County here in California to pass a resolution in support of a ceasefire in Gaza. And that took months of organizing, months of pressuring, protesting in front of elected officials, campaigns where they were trying to, fundraisers, and going to council meetings, filling the room, giving public comments, saying this is a small gesture. We just want the city to stand in solidarity with people who are currently being killed with our tax dollars. That's all we're asking. But even still, there was our mayor who was very Blue Lives Matter in her ideology. I don't know if that's a UK
I've
reference.
never heard that before, but I love it.
Blue Lives Matter was the slogan that came up during the Black Lives Matter protest.
Yeah.
In response, saying, "Oh, Black Lives Matter. Well, cops also experience danger in the line of duty. So blue lives."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's, she made a comment during the push to pass that resolution in support of a ceasefire, saying, "It's not my job as a mayor of a city. It's not my job to speak out on international affairs. So I'm gonna keep quiet." So I think, again, that's going back to the quote. I also remember that during the civil rights movement, which is, every student here in the United States learns about the civil rights movement. We all learn about Martin Luther King Jr. He's the only person besides George Washington and Abraham Lincoln who has a holiday after his birthday. But during the civil rights movement, he had a very unfavorable perception by the American people. They did not like what he was doing. Most people said that his actions were actually harmful to the Black community, that they were making things worse. So it's just that consciousness, that awareness that the struggle for justice, at least in real time, you're not going to be seeing the kind of allyship that you would like to see. You're not going to see the kind of support that you would like to have. But that doesn't mean you stop, because that's the only way that progress has ever happened.
Wow. What you've just shared is so impactful for me, because it really encapsulates so much of how, I've been feeling as somebody who operates within the wellness industry, the spiritual community, whatever you'd like to call it, the yoga circles, the health circles. And I, similar, it sounds like to Leslie, have been amazed by the silence, by the level of silence for people who ostensibly stand for change and healing. And within the last couple of years, in regards to Palestine, I have been amazed by how few people have thought that it is their place to even name what is happening, let alone post about it on their social media, let alone be active within fundraising efforts, organizational efforts, whatever it is. So that it makes, it's really impactful for me. But it's also bringing to my attention too, and what you're speaking to, of like having the few people within your community that you're actively engaged with, and how strong those connections can feel. And even us having this conversation, I feel like there's so much power in social media to connecting you with people who are standing for collective change. And I was having a conversation with my husband last night, where I was talking about all of my internet friends that I've met online over over the last couple of years, people who are really making waves within collective change. And it feels like those people, despite the fact that you might not have known them for, that long, there is so much trust and safety built up within those connections as well, because it's like, wow, those people are advocating so hard for people that they have never met, people that they've known don't know the other side of the world. If push came to shove for me and I needed something, wow, they would definitely rally, So I love what you're speaking to there within that quote of, yes, love's never been a popular movement, but the people that I meet, the people that I have met through social justice causes over the last couple of years, those relationships are really strong. And I think that you were speaking to that in your video too, of sharing this stuff to connect with more people who get it, and there being so much power in that as well. So makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, honestly, like you said, that's the beautiful thing for me. I've tried talking with my family members about these kinds of things, and there's zero interest, zero investment in, I've never had a cousin come with me to a protest, and we've known each other since we were children. We live in the same county, and they've never said, "Hey, I want to come and support this or that." I have people that I've known since elementary school. Similarly, some of them may be on social media liking my posts, but they're not going to show up when I'm asking for support. But on the internet, you find people, and I've met people even just the last 2-3 years that I would consider brothers and sisters in the ways that we've shown up for each other.
Yeah, amazing. And what you shared and I think you were alluding to there, and what you shared within the video that we connected on, was actually it's really uncomfortable for people to be alerted to how they potentially benefit from the systems that are in place, how they are potentially complicit within these systems, and where most people, the majority of people, which doesn't come from a place of judgment, it's just a fact, are presented with this, like, either you can stay kind of comfortably uncomfortable or comfortable within this kind of well-oiled machine, or you can do the deep excavation work, which is fundamentally uncomfortable. And I suppose it is just a reality within that a lot of people do veer towards the other side of things, which I suppose also leads me on to something else that I wanted to ask you, which was, you mentioned that a college student asked you a question around why you care and speak out about issues that do not affect you directly, in terms of what's happening, for example, in Gaza or undocumented immigrants. And I know that this was a question that you posed to your audience for people to comment on what their reasons were, but I'm just curious how you answered that question to the student.
When the student asked me that, I took it as a genuine inquiry. It wasn't necessarily like a dismissal of my views. It was like, how do you articulate this to somebody? When people ask, why do you care about what's happening in Gaza? You have a son. Why don't you just focus on raising your son? Or there's local business here. Why don't you just focus on local business? I try to recognize that whatever, there's that famous quote by MLK that gets co-opted by people every year, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. But I think really it's just that spirit that, again, for me, my early teachers were people in the struggle for Black liberation, the Black liberation movement, where the philosophy has been none of us are free until all of us are free. And what happens to one person today may very well happen to you tomorrow. The poem that I believe I quoted in there from World War II, first they came for the socialists and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a socialist. Then they came for the communists and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. It's, to me, interesting how cliche of a theme it is, and yet it's so hard for people to recognize it and to live by it. So for me, it really is just a recognition that I am interlinked with every human being on the planet, because the comfort that I enjoy as a citizen here in the United States comes at the expense of the exploitation of someone somewhere else. If I want to enjoy a chocolate bar, I have to recognize where the cocoa bean was grown and what labor went into bringing that cocoa bean. That was one of the lessons I used to teach my students, was how in the Ivory Coast, farmers are so poorly paid that they have to pull their children out of school to help them on the farms to grow the cocoa beans so that they can sell them to these international corporations that then sell the chocolate over here to us, fat Americans who can't get enough. Meanwhile, they don't even make enough money to buy the chocolate bar. So it's just a recognition that we are interlinked. In situations like what's happening in Gaza, more clearly the link is there in that it is our government that is providing the political cover. It's our government that's providing billions of dollars every year to support this government. It's our government that is providing the weapons and the military capacity to do the kind of harm that they are doing and to commit that genocide. I think also just learning from history about what happened when people stood in solidarity and how we were able to impact change in that way. And so if I know that history, then I have to follow that template. I think the challenge for a lot of people is that they may not know that history, or if they do have that historical understanding, it's very surface level.
Yeah.
I think that's where I come from on that.
Yeah, totally. And, I love what you're speaking to there around, I think interconnectedness it's become a little bit of a jargon word, certainly within the kind of wellness spaces of, everyone is interconnected. And it was almost like a kind of like feel good experience, which it is on one side, but also what you're speaking to on the other side of that is the privileges that we enjoy within our relative day-to-day comfort do also come at the exploitation or the suffering of other people in other places. I think what you're speaking to there, it really gives this extra depth to this sense of being interconnected. And I suppose for me, what I hear within that and what comes up for me around, my intentions, for example, speaking up around Palestine, is this sense of like moral responsibility that those of us who do have access to these privileges, even just in the forms of like basic safety, like day to day, or basic comfort day to day. For me, that is a real sense of moral responsibility. And the more privilege that we have, the more moral responsibility that we have too. That definitely comes up for me in response to that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the counter to that, and what you might see, is people who see that they have this privilege that they enjoy and this comfort that they enjoy. I like that you used earlier the word comfort. I've gotten accustomed to using that word because people don't like to recognize that they have privilege. But if you say, hey, you live pretty comfortably, they're able to at least acknowledge that. Yeah. You have a nice couch, you have a nice warm house.
Yeah.
But I think the counter to that is, if you recognize that you have this privilege, this comfort that you enjoy, then you feel some sort of obligation. The counter to that, people say, I have this privilege, I have this comfort that I enjoy, and I don't want to lose that.
Yes.
And if speaking out means I risk losing that, then I'm not going to speak out.
Totally. And, there was something that came up a few conversations ago, which was talking about the definitions around solidarity, and that if your solidarity does not inconvenience you, it is not solidarity at all, which really struck a chord with me. And it's something that I think about a lot. And I think, to what you're saying now, I think that there is this challenge of, if it inconveniences people, then they do go back to the perhaps just wanting to stay in the relative comfort, let's say. I wanted to ask you a question about, I know that you've spoken to this within some of your shares, that as a child growing up, you were really drawn to stories of struggle. And, you described it in shares, and I found that really interesting. And I would love to ask you, for the sake of listeners, what were these stories that impacted you? And what was it about the stories at the time that you found so interesting?
In the United States, we are presented with a very sanitized history of what happened to people on this continent. And so, for example, when we learned about the missions that were built here by colonizers, we don't necessarily learn about the kind of cruelties that they experienced, the ways that people were dispossessed from their land, that women and children were brutally abused, that people had their arms and legs, mutilated. What they teach us here is, or what I remember learning, I should say, because different teachers, different classrooms, but what I remember learning is the missions were built from adobe bricks. And here's how you make an adobe brick. Here's a milk carton, and we're going to fill it with some goo. And at the end of a week, we have a brick. And now we're on to the next lesson. So there were lessons like that I had to do some digging on my own when I got older and learn about what actually happened. But there are certain lessons that are kind of core to the American education system, things like slavery. We do learn about slavery because it's kind of hard to sanitize slavery. They try, but at the end of the day, there were people owning people who did not want to be property. And that lasted for centuries. And so you have to talk about that reality. And when I would hear those stories, that sparked my attention. I was like, wow, people did this to other people. And people were able to fight back and end that system. That's powerful. When I learned about World War II, and again, the kind of atrocities that were happening during World War II, just to see the level of cruelty that humans are able to inflict on each other.
Yeah.
And what drives people to do that? What is the psychology of that? What is it? Why weren't people speaking out against this? How could you not? So those kinds of stories. Of course, the civil rights movement for me, MLK, very early on, I identified as someone who was the kind of leader that I would want to look to whenever I'm running into questions of morality or injustice. People like MLK, who are sort of lionized as, again, in the education system, they have a very individualistic way of communicating these stories. And it was basically MLK saved the day and ended racism. So that was what I learned in elementary school.
Yeah.
But then as I got older, I stuck with those stories, and I learned more about the abolitionist movement during slavery. I learned about the resistance of Jewish people during World War II, like in the Warsaw Ghetto. And during the civil rights movement, I learned that it wasn't just MLK. I learned that there were people like Stokely Carmichael, people like Fannie Lou Hamer, the Black Panther Party, which was organizing, all these different people that were rallying around this cause of liberation, but from different perspectives, and that they didn't have agreements necessarily. You know, I'm learning about the ways that our government tried to target these people. The fact that the FBI was pursuing Martin Luther King, that they were listening in on his phone calls, that they were sending him letters telling him to commit suicide.
Yeah, I only heard about that recently.
Yeah, for any listeners who don't know what I'm talking about, please look up COINTELPRO, COINTELPRO. And it was a program, the counterintelligence program, that the FBI implemented to target people like Martin Luther King, like Malcolm X. Everybody in the Black Panther Party was essentially on a watch list. And so when you recognize that these people who were fighting essentially for the freedom of their people were seen as threats to national security, there's a lot of questions that come with that. And so when they ask you to, to stand up and pledge allegiance to the flag, knowing what that flag represents is a little different once those stories are in your head, Yeah, I can go on, but I'm not sure if I answered your question.
No, you did completely. And there was a phrase that you used in one of your shares talking about revolutionary optimism, which you pinpointed in these various different movements. And I would love for you to speak to that, because I feel like it's really important for us to hold on to that, especially at these times. We look at what is happening all over the world, and a lot of the time it is incredibly concerning and horrifying. There's so much happening in the States around, immigration, ICE. I watch it on the internet, everything that's happening with Palestine. I feel like it's so important for us to understand a notion of revolutionary optimism. Can you speak to that?
The notion of revolutionary optimism, I would say, is just the recognition that people have endured all kinds of terrible atrocities. Like we said, I'm the descendant of both European colonizers and indigenous people. As a Mexican, I've talked to my family about what my ancestry was. They said we're mixed. But I know that people were suffering all kinds of terrible things, and they're still here. Their descendants are still here. Slavery was institutional here in our country for centuries, and then it wasn't. And the people who survived that went on to have families and educate their children about that history, and they're still here. And if you can recognize that history is not something that happened way back then, history is a continuation. We are currently a product of history, and we are making history in the moment. If you see that, then you have to appreciate that there are people who have overcome all kinds of struggles throughout history. We are facing our own struggles. Every generation has their struggle. And if they overcame, then we can too. You may not see the fruits of your labor in your lifetime. There were people that were fighting to end slavery from the day that it was conceived, but it took centuries of struggle for that to finally come to an end. And even still today in the United States, if you look up the 13th Amendment, there's people who are fighting to end slavery as a punishment for a crime. So the struggle is still there, but there are people who are continuing that legacy. So I think revolutionary optimism to me is just knowing that there is a legacy of struggle that we are carrying on, and we can't just give in to despair because it feels insurmountable in the moment.
What you've just shared there, it's so important to keep holding on to, because something that I hear a lot is we're helpless within these movements. There's nothing that we can do. And I know that you've spoken to this as well. But just, I suppose, seeing ourselves as, these little cogs in a big wheel of change, that lasts for lifetimes and for generations. And a friend of mine has studied, she did a master's in social justice movements and social innovation. And she's very engaged in, the work around Palestine at the moment. And she was saying that there are so many parallels with where we're at, even in terms of like it not being safe to speak out right now, or people being vilified for speaking out against, kind of mainstream politics within that, that we're very much in one of those moments of history that we look back on history, let's say, and, seeing the parallels of where we're at now in a lot of that rhetoric as well. So I feel like, yeah, what you're bringing attention to is really important for us to hold on to within kind of this notion of revolutionary optimism. I hadn't come across that word before, but yeah, I feel like it's much needed at this time.
Just to speak on that, notion of, there's that quote, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. If anyone who is looking for context about what our current situation when it comes to Palestine, what parallels might be past for us to reference, you can look at the Vietnam War. It was a very clear parallel for what we're seeing today, a clearly unjust action where our government is the one who is providing the military support and the funding and is trying to propagandize the people to support it. But over the years, people came to see it for what it was, and it took time. And there are still people today who will stand by our actions in Vietnam and say that it was a just war. But you see the ways that student protesters rose up, and they didn't just set up encampments, they were burning down buildings. And so, again, learning from history isn't just about seeing what they did back then, it's seeing how does it relate to where we are today.
Yeah, absolutely. When you were talking about education, and you obviously with your background in education, as an educator, but also what you were so interested in at school and this kind of sanitized version of history that we get taught. I've seen you mention this quote around there's no such thing as neutral education. It's either complicity or freedom. Can you speak to that within what you have witnessed, firstly as a student, but also as an educator within education?
Yeah, the quote comes from Paulo Freire, who's the author of a book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed, along with many other books. And the quote, I believe, I'm paraphrasing, but there is no such thing as neutral education. It either serves as an instrument of conformity or an instrument for freedom. And the way I interpret that, if you are born into a society where there is a dominant paradigm, what Leslie likes to call the dominant paradigm, that says you need to think this way, you need to act this way, you need to speak this way, you need to see these people this way, and the education reinforces that worldview, then it is an education that is serving to conform, to mold you to fit into that worldview, so that you don't rock the boat, so that you don't cause any kind of disturbance to the natural order of things as the system would have it. If you have an educational experience that is critical of that worldview, that challenges that worldview, that asks you to analyze how that worldview came to be, who does that worldview serve? Is there an alternative worldview that we might be able to operate under? Is there a template that maybe was buried or erased or burned? And so when you have an education that is able to be critical of that dominant paradigm, I think that is what can serve as a tool for freedom, because then you're not just fitting into a box that has been pre-crafted for you. You're able to think, you're able to have a democratic dialogue with your peers and with your neighbors and with your friends and family about what kind of world do we want to have and how can we make that world a reality.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? I mean, certainly within the last few years, you've mentioned around Leslie has been learning about Palestine since 2007. For yourself, it was around Black Lives Matter when you came into contact with, Palestinians within the movement. And for myself, it was only after October 7th when it happened. I realized, I don't really know anything about this issue. And I knew a certain version of events about the issue that I had been taught through not even so much schooling, but just, I guess, collective narrative. And the more that I started to dig into it, the more that I started to understand, hang on, a lot of the stuff that I have been taught here, it's not let's say the full truth about this issue. And when you start pulling on that thread, it's suddenly like, oh, okay. And there's a thread on capitalism and imperialism and the military industrial complex and social issues and racism. And you just keep pulling on the thread. And it's like, whoa, so much stuff that I was taught within mainstream education is I like your word sanitized, but also I suppose from my experience, like what I was taught, quite inaccurate, I would say. Certainly, I guess it's that quote, right, of like history is taught by the oppressors. I think I've probably got that totally wrong, the quote.
No, history is taught by the victors, history is taught by the oppressors.
Yes.
To kind of, in the United States recently, with very conservative leaders in place trying to warp the history of our country, they have things saying like slaves were actually just migrant workers that came from other countries. Like they'll say as much as they can get away with to clean up the history in a way that serves their narrative. And so I think, with Palestine, that's definitely the case, where the game plan there was to make it so complex, make it sound too intricate, where you don't know enough to have an opinion about what's happening. Trust us. We know what's happening. And here's what you should do.
Totally. And I think in a way that's why I guess it's captured the minds and hearts. I mean, obviously because of like what is happening has been totally barbaric, but it's also, I think, for so many people who have taken the time to engage, it has just been the biggest like rug pulling on like the whole system. So yeah, I think for those of us that have been engaged with it, a lot has come from that. I feel like it has kind of electrified a whole generation of new social justice activists, people who probably would never have even classified themselves as activists in the past. I feel like it has radicalized an entire generation of people.
Yeah, if I can go back to one of the questions you asked earlier about, why do you speak on things that may not necessarily directly impact you? I think what you were talking about with the threads, where if I can draw the connection between what's happening in Palestine and what's happening here, it's another way to bring people into the movement. You may not have seen how this impacts you, but let me help you see that connection. The billions of dollars that we send to go kill families in Gaza could be money that we're using to help our people so that those families in Gaza get to live and our families get to thrive.
Yes.
The ways that police are trained. Our police here in the United States are trained by the Israeli military on tactics that they have developed and mastered on the Palestinian population. So when we have cop cities that are being built in the United States, where they are using urban warfare tactics that have been passed down to them from this training ground that is Palestine, that will impact you.
Yeah. Wow. I had no idea about that, about the American police being trained by the Israeli army. Wow. You learn something new and destructive every day. I mean, similarly, I suppose, in the UK, I saw something online recently, which was like a meme of like, why do we, and I feel it's so great that, in the horrors of happening in the world, I feel like the meme game is very strong on the internet, which is great. Really saves us. But I saw something the other day, which was like, why do we always have billions of pounds or billions of dollars to send for bombs in other countries, but we never have money for community care? I mean, literally this year in the UK, disability support has been cut, social care has been cut, but yet we still have money for global horror. I just wanted to ask you a question because I'm conscious of the time, so I just wanted to ask you a couple more questions. You talk about community and community organization, and a quote that I think about a lot is Malcolm X, who said, "We aren't outnumbered, we are just out-organized." And I was curious, in your opinion, with your expertise, how can we get better organized, or how do you get organized and create community?
Yeah, I caution away from using the word expertise for myself.
Okay.
I'm definitely passionate about the things I do. I'm averse to calling myself an expert in any particular field.
Yeah.
But I could say that the experiences that I've had in organizing people really rallies around understanding our shared humanity and finding ways to help bring that to the forefront. I think what's really powerful about the kind of work that Leslie does is that is a central piece to remind people that you are not your job title, you are not your degrees, you are not your car, you're this or that. You are a child who has grown up, and we were all children at one point, and so that's something that we can all relate to at the very basic level. Yeah, we are humans, that we were children, that we were brought up in a world that molded us into the people that we are today. But if you go back far enough, we all have a link. We all have an ancestral link. We all have experiential links that we can relate on. I think, on a very kind of just abstract way, that's something that really helps, and that we have as a central value in the kind of work that we do. On a more concrete level, how do we organize people? I think it is by finding common goals, finding common missions that we have. I think for me, for example, one of my earliest experiences in organizing a community was in my neighborhood, where it was a parking issue. We had the city that was closing off streets for public parking to certain residents. So if you were a single family homeowner, you can park on this street. If you lived in a condominium complex, you cannot park on this street. And so we were living in this condominium complex, and we were like, how do we fight back against what the city's doing? And just over the course of a year, we were knocking on doors, talking to people, saying, hey, we're going to send this letter to our council member. We're going to talk to the public works department to see what we can do. We're going to host this Zoom call to have everyone come on and share their experiences. And from there, we went on to saying, hey, you know what? Let's not just come together to talk about a problem. Let's come together to have a barbecue for the families. Let's come together to bring our kids out for a Halloween celebration, and we can watch a movie out in the lawn. So finding ways to bring people together around moments of joy, I think, is important too, in addition to just addressing problems. Because if you're just focusing on the negative and the problems, you will get tired. You will get burned out. So finding ways to connect over joy, I think that's important. Another key important aspect is speaking in a language that people understand, and trusting that people are capable of understanding things that you may not assume they are able to understand. When people talk to the Latino community here in the United States, I think the only issue that they really think about is immigration. But we care about housing, we care about education, we care about good paying jobs, we care about the quality of food and water that our families get to have. And so recognizing that there are all these common themes that we can connect on, and using that language to bring that to the forefront. So those are just a couple. I can go on, but it really is about just getting to know people on a very human level and connecting on what brings us together. It seems very corny, very cliche, but that's really at the root of it.
Yeah, I love that. And I think with so many of these things too, it's the corny stuff, or like the simplistic stuff, is quite often the answer, around, like, it's almost like a return to, even like the return to being in community. It's creating community. We look for these like very abstract things to like warrant our way forward, but at the end of the day, creating community and bringing more connection and bringing people together and implementing more community care, there is so much power within that, because I suppose at the end of the day, it's all people want, right? To feel more connected with each other locally, globally. So yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I think also reminding people that we were, at one point in our history, we were a collective species. The only way that we've been able to make it this far is because of the way that we collaborate and share ideas and look out for each other. And it's only very recently that we've been itemized in this way, alienated from each other. And there are people that benefit from that alienation.
Yes.
And so, one of the greatest examples I can think of is just labor union organizing. When you have workers who don't talk to each other, who don't trust each other, they're very easy to exploit. They're very easy to take advantage of. When you have workers that meet every day, that share just information with each other, support each other, then the bosses have a much harder time manipulating them to do what they want them to do.
Yeah, I was having a conversation with someone recently who was talking about, the way that he sees collective change. And, we get often so caught up in the differences that we have towards collective change. I mean, God, you just need to go to the comments section of like any post on Instagram, but we get almost kind of so distracted with the differences that we have in our kind of different way towards collective change. And he was talking about the importance of, like, if we have the same shared values, the same shared vision, then our ability to, despite our differences, share ideas between us and use our differences to collaborate to find better solutions that we otherwise wouldn't have perhaps come up with, also being really powerful. So yeah, it was something else that I heard within that as well, this kind of collaborative element that I suppose is important for us to reclaim within this collective change. I love also that you picked up on my like casual use of the word expertise as well, because something that has really come up for me within the last couple of years, within so much of this deconditioning work, especially around, you know, I suppose the capitalist white supremacist systems in which the world operates. There is so much of this kind of be the expert, have the kind of like masterful knowledge and all of this. And it has been such a relief, I would say, over the past years, of the deeper I have gone with deconditioning work, the more I have just like permissioning of not having all of the answers and having more questions has also been such a beautiful thing to come out of all of this. So yeah, when you said that you don't position yourself as an expert, it really just reminded me of that thought process within myself. So yeah, thank you for that. I wanted to ask just one more thing, and I feel like you've kind of answered this a little bit. And I know that your background as an educator of, you know, learning how to communicate with kids, but I know that you are a dad. I don't know how old your kids are, but I'm really interested in how you communicate with your kids about what is happening within the world, whether that is on a local level, a global level. Do you tell them about global issues? How do you explain that? How much do you explain? I think it's a really interesting question to ask you.
No, it's a great question. We actually just started a series called Seeds of Liberation, where it's all about that. This is not promo, but it is relevant. It is relevant.
Yeah, totally.
Because that's really why we created it. We know that, especially after October 7th, and especially during the election last year, where it was Trump versus Kamala Harris, there were a lot of parents on our pages saying, how do I talk to my kid about the genocide? How do I talk to my kid about the boycott, why we can't go to McDonald's today? How do I talk to my kid about Trump's attempted assassination on Trump? You know, the ICE raids, all these things. How do I talk to my kids? For me, I had a lot of experience as a middle school teacher.
Yeah.
When I was teaching from 2017 to 2022. And so in that time, we had all kinds of disruptions to the norm. Obviously, COVID in 2020, I had to explain to children why we're having to wear masks and why you're having to go home for 2 weeks, and don't worry, we'll be right back. And then we're gone for a year plus. And during that time, while everyone's home, you had the Black Lives Matter protests come up. 20% of the students at the school where I was teaching are Black, and 70% were Latino. And so I felt that I needed to address that with them. You had, you know, the election, obviously, in 2020 as well. So I had a lot of experience talking to my middle school students about that. With our children, it is a little different, because my middle school students had that dynamic where they knew, I have a question, my teacher can help me.
Yeah.
With our kids, they don't necessarily want to have those conversations. They're wondering what's for breakfast and what are we going to be doing today. But there are certain contexts where we feel that it's important for them to know certain things. And what we tell parents is that you have to be very careful about how you consider what they need to know and what you want them to know. There are certain realities that they are going to encounter. Here in our city of Santa Ana, if we go down the street, you're going to see people sleeping on the street, because we have poverty in our country and here in the city. And so I may need to explain that to you. How does a person end up sleeping on the street, and why isn't anyone doing anything about it? But does my child need to know about what's happening in Gaza? Do they need to see photos of the children in the hospitals? I don't know. That's going to be something that parents have to decide. What is appropriate for their age range? What is appropriate for their emotional maturity? What is it that they need to know in order to navigate the world that they're going out into? So I think that's a prominent question for us, is do they need to know this, or can this wait? How will this impact them? Will they carry this weight? Because I know we do. When we're seeing all those videos and we're seeing all these stories, that weighs heavy on us. And so do our children need to carry that weight? And also, I think the big one is just addressing their own curiosity. Because when kids want to know something, they'll let you know. You know, you don't necessarily need to feed it to them. They'll let you know, I'm curious about this, I'm curious about that. Leslie's children are half Latino and half white. And so they have a lot of questions about race. And so when those come up, we try to address it as gently as we can, being mindful of their cognitive development and what vocabulary they might be able to understand and digest and what vocabulary might be over their heads. We talk about the history of colonization because we feel that's an important context for them to understand. Yeah. Where did these different races even come from? So in our series, we really go in depth and talk about those kinds of things. But yeah, it's a complex question.
Thank you. Yeah, it sounds really interesting. The course as well that you and Leslie have put together, and that was not a plug, but but it sounds.
We just had a session yesterday, and so
amazing.
Coming up.
I think, yeah, it's really interesting because certainly, a lot of friends or people I know who've been very actively engaged, certainly with Palestine over the last couple of years, it's definitely been a question on people's mind of how much do I tell my children? What do they need to know? What should they know? So, yeah, I think it's a very alive question in the minds of a lot of people. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that and speaking to that. I know that we're at time, so I know that you need to run off and go about the rest of your day, but just wanted to check in. Was there anything else that you wanted to bring into the recording today? Anything that we haven't spoken to that you think is really important to bring in?
I think just something that I'm not sure if I addressed it, back when you were talking about what is it that motivates this kind of work, I think something else that I want to just really impart is that a lot of the work that we do is really about humanizing people in a world that tries to dehumanize so many. In Gaza, they label them as terrorists. And if you're a child terrorist who will grow up to be a terrorist. And we want to remind people, no, these are human beings. These are families. Here in the United States, when there's talk about immigration and deportation, they say that you are illegals, you are criminals, you are criminal illegal aliens. No, these are human beings, just like you, who are trying to do the best they can for themselves and their families. So I think really emphasizing the importance of humanizing the conversation, whatever conversation it is you're having. And also just the responsibility that we have, if you know something that you feel can enrich someone else's understanding of what's happening in our world, then find a way to share that however you can. Because the ways that we are able to educate each other is revolutionized through social media. I think the fact that you and I are having a conversation right now is a powerful thing. And so the more that we can spread that knowledge to each other to help inform each other about things and perspectives that we may not have from our own lived experience, but we can gain from each other, I think that's also something that I want to share with people.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much for speaking to that. It's so important. And I just want to add on to that a friend of mine runs an organization in our local town, which provides accommodation and resources and things for people seeking asylum. And she said that it's really interesting, even within our mainstream media and our language, we call them asylum seekers, but actually they're people seeking asylum, and how much, what you're speaking to there of how much the world dehumanizes people, obviously within Gaza, within people seeking asylum. There's so many ways that the world is constantly trying to do that. So I love that you just brought that in, rehumanizing people, so powerful. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Where can people find you? I would love, for people just to know how to connect with you.
The main platform we communicate with folks is on Instagram. So you can find me at Fernando.Deveras, Deveras. And Leslie, her organization that I'm a part of, it's called Latinx Parenting, Latinx Parenting. And we have a website as well if you want to learn a little bit more about that. But we're looking to expand. So, just follow us on there if you want updates.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, Leslie's work as well sounds amazing. So I'll be chasing her to get on here too. But yeah, the work that you guys do together, I love the fact that you fused your backgrounds to create something new as well. So yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed the conversation. So yeah, thank you so much for connecting today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. It's great to have you with me on this journey towards higher love for all. Our time is our greatest commodity and gift, so thanks for investing it in yourself and sharing it with me. Please do take a moment to rate and review the show. all of which enables more people to find me and for me to connect with more great guests each week for both yours and my enjoyment. All links, references, and contact information is detailed too within the show notes. And I always love to hear your feedback, so feel free to hit me up on my Instagram at higherlove_with_Megan or via my website higher-love.com. Send your takeaways, and if you enjoyed this episode, please share or send on to someone else who would benefit. Until next time, big love.